Today I want to take a few minutes to discuss a topic that seems to be getting increasing airtime on social media, and the conversation around it just continues to grow. And that is the topic of hypermobility. And so there's a lot of anecdotal evidence coming out on social media, people finding that hypermobility is kind of an answer to a lot of their chronic pain conditions. There's also a lot of anecdotal evidence that individuals are finding when they receive a diagnosis of neurodivergence, so something like ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, etc., that tends to come along with an altered level of natural mobility in their bodies. The research around this topic is really truly in its infancy and is still being developed, but there is a lot of anecdotal kind of individual evidence out there on the internet and on social media, kind of trying to figure out the relationship between these two things. So today I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about what is hypermobility, why do we care about it so much in the physio community, and how do we treat it in the physio community, or how do we manage it, I guess is a better term for it. So hypermobility, hyper means an excess of, so an excess of mobility. So how I describe this to my patients is I explain that mobility comes on a spectrum. We're all born somewhere on the mobility spectrum. So just like hair color, eye color, height, there is no real good or bad. It's just a spectrum. And so on one end, we have our hypomobile people, so reduced mobility. I describe these people as my super stiff as a board people. They are incredibly stable. They are brilliant at sports like football, where you want to be just solid. And then on the other end of the spectrum is hypermobility. So that's my excessive mobility people. I describe these as my puddle people. So you have your boards on one end and your puddles on the other end, and everybody falls somewhere along that spectrum. So hypermobility, my puddle people, these are the humans that have an excess of mobility and is often kind of touted as the good side of the spectrum. So these are the people who never have to worry about their flexibility and they can do the splits, they can touch their toes, they're just going to be flexible forever. And that's not necessarily true, because mobility and flexibility are two very different things, and that's a whole conversation in and of itself. What happens in hypermobility is what the connective tissue in our body has more give to it. So there's more laxity, which means that these people often do find themselves in sports like dance, and cheerleading and gymnastics, because they can present as having a lot of flexibility, especially in childhood. Where we run into problems, especially later in life, is the body needs to be able to control that excess mobility. So for example, these are the people who are much more likely to dislocate a joint than they are to snap a bone. So they will roll their ankles a whole lot. They, potentially could dislocate a shoulder, but they may not break a bone. And so the body tries, as it's navigating through life, to control that excessive mobility in order to protect from injury and to adapt to the world well. And so what can happen is, if our stabilizer muscles throughout our body, so we're thinking deeper muscles, smaller muscles typically, if those muscles aren't very strong and doing their job very well, our larger muscles tend to take over, and they get really, really tight and restricted. And so, for example, in the shoulder and the neck, if our rotator cuff muscles deep in the shoulder aren't doing their job to stabilize the shoulder, we end up with a lot of neck and chest overactivation, and we can get really, really tight like this. And then that can present as actually stiffness or reduced mobility, and can also cause a lot of pain. And so in the physio community, we care very much about treating and managing hypermobility, because we want people to not be in pain, obviously, and we want people to be as active as they want to be. And so for myself, I am personally on the more hypermobile end of things. And I, for a long time, believed that I really couldn't be a runner because running hurt my body. My body wasn't strong enough to manage the impact from running well. So my feet would hurt, my knees would hurt, my hips would hurt, because I couldn't manage the mobility of the impact. So what I needed to do in order to be able to run was strengthen deep hip rotator muscles, a lot of my deeper musculature in my feet, in order to manage the forces of running. And so if you yourself think that you might be on the more hypermobile end of things, stability work is going to be a lot more important to you. And so building that deep strength is going to be really important. So how do you know if you're hypermobile? There's a lot of information out there on the internet, different tests, different signs, different symptoms, different things. But I want to take a moment today and show you just a couple of the things that clinically I look for, as well as, of course, patient-reported symptoms is hugely important. But these are a few things that I look for in patients' bodies. So first up here, we have if you can touch your thumbs to your forearms. And then if you can extend your fingers beyond 90 degrees, especially your pinky fingers. I'm doing my index fingers, but that's a hypermobility sign. Hyperextension of your elbows beyond neutral or 0 degrees on either side there. And then same thing with your knees. If you can extend or straighten your knees beyond 0 degrees or neutral on either side. So if you feel like any of these things potentially apply to you, or you're just wondering, where do I fall on this spectrum, definitely book yourself in for an assessment with a physiotherapist, and they'll be able to help direct you more specifically. Thanks so much.